I am largely a traditional materials artist, so if you want to ink digitally, this video won't be much help, but it may be an insight or maybe interesting. Let's see how it goes. So anyway, let me tell you a story. About 5 years ago nearly, having worked a full-time job alongside my nearest damn it full-time job as a wedding photographer, I ran out of steam in December 2017 and essentially suffered a complete episode of mental exhaustion. After a few months taking it easy, I found myself essentially learning how to draw again, manga specifically. When I was a kid, all I did was draw. That was who I was. Then around about 2003, 2004, it stopped. When I moved to Japan, I found some of my last pieces of artwork as I packed up my apartment. It wasn't that great, but I still had it. It was mostly my own illustrations along with some Evangelion stuff. So gradually over 2018 I began to draw more. But the one thing I was so scared of was ink. Ink is permanent, and once it's there, it can't be erased. So for a long time I stuck to just pencil. In all honesty, I'm still a bit scared of ink. Small mistakes can indeed be corrected, but there are also limits. But my advice to you is, if you're a bit nervous about using ink, is to just start doing it and keep a sketchbook where you can practice as much as you like. I talk about how I use a sketchbook to beat my procrastination in my last video, so go and check it out to see what tips there are in there. But through using a sketchbook for my ink creations, it has accelerated both my ability and confidence with ink. And also, just don't be afraid of mistakes. In fact, expect them. Don't hold yourself to unreasonable standards. Just accept you're going to improve with time and practice. Of course, if your inking is perfect already, then, well, I hope you can teach me in the comments. Anyway, let's get on. In terms of materials, I use B4 size tracing tables, the minimum suitable for inking manga pages in my opinion, and a range of Copic Multiliner pens from 0.03 nibs to 0.5. I find myself using the 0.05 and 0.3 the most. These are available outside of Japan, but a bit more expensive as you might imagine. When I first started inking my manga future saviors, I stalled because I was under the impression that only dip ink or India ink would be acceptable. In the end, I decided to use what worked for me. And these pens work for me. The very first thing I do is warm up. I never ink from cold as I need to loosen up my wrist and elbow, so a simple sketch either in pencil or ink beforehand is usually enough. Even if it's just reproducing some simple portraits I've already done, it doesn't really matter. I don't try and sketch something new and amazing, it's just to warm up. I find this far more enjoyable than just basic pen strokes. Once I'm ready, I use a clean sheet of deleter B4 paper, the same as my draft pages. Some manga artists will ink right over their pencil drafts, but at the moment I don't. I trace. The reason for this is that I want to keep my drafts because they have a little beauty of their own in my eyes. I don't mean that I am woo, look at my art in a whoop whoop kind of way. What I mean is I appreciate the work I have put into them. One day I'm sure I'm going to rue that when I come to move and I'm having to shift boxes that weigh a ton. But for now, I trace onto a clean sheet of B4 manga paper. I clip the draft to the new page with standard bulldog clips, as these give a nice firm grasp on the page and stop it slipping about over the course of the inking. Now, a good manga artist would probably start at the top right and work their way across and then down to the bottom left of the page, but being an artist that cherry picks, I often find myself starting with the easiest panel on the page. Thankfully I keep my hands clean so there doesn't end up being much in the way of dirty marks on the page. Usually I'd use a piece of scrap paper under my wrist, but sometimes I forget. I'm not perfect. The reason I like Copic Multiliners is they're very smudge proof, and the nibs are great for getting expressive pen strokes where, with different pressure exerted on the actual pen and the nib, I can get different expressive strokes that look interesting. But if you use another pen, use it. In terms of drawing tools, I make use of a good ruler, set squares, and occasionally a bendable Staedler brand curve ruler. I also occasionally use a circle and oval stencil, which is useful for some details, but when it comes to drawing perspectives, it's largely eyeballed. I have considered using isometric templates under the inked page and the draft, so it's between them, but to be honest, I find that with experience I have been able to eyeball perspective to a standard with which I'm happy with, and which is continued to improve by just doing it. If there are any details that I'm concerned about committing to with ink, I'll lightly use pencil on the ink page and work out details before proceeding. This page is a good example, as I neglected to draw the background buildings fully on the third panel, so I did a lot more drawing in pencil on this page than I ordinarily would, but it shows nicely how I'm using set squares and rulers, and with my own eye I'm able to work this kind of thing out. I'm not saying that I'm perfect at this, but I've built enough experience and confidence in my skills to be able to effect it to a standard with which I'm happy with. In terms of what I will ink first on a panel, I always ink in the foremost foreground items first and work backwards. So typically this will be a character, but sometimes it can be foliage, it could be a building, anything. This is from experience, because if I do the characters first, it's easy to get carried away and ink beyond where something is meant to be in front of the character. Likewise, if I tackle the background first, I may ink too far into something that is in front of it, so it makes sense to work from the foreground towards the background. If I do make a mistake, I use Deleta brand white corrector fluid pens. They're a bit of a nuisance to use sometimes, especially if I haven't used them for a while, but overall I find them the best for what I want to use. So I just get them working with a piece of scrap paper, shake them thoroughly, press the nib a few times, and then usually the ink begins to, or the correction fluid begins to flow correctly through the pen. Now, of course, obviously this does mean that if I make a sufficiently large enough mistake, it could mean starting over fresh. But as I've become a bit more experienced by just committing to creating inked pages, this happens less and less. When it comes to drawing borders around my panels, personally I don't. This is more to do with my process than fear this time. I use a large multifunction machine at the convenience stores here in Japan that can scan B4 pages easily. However, I find that I have to scale the pages slightly when it comes to adding Manga screen tones in Clip Studio Paint, which means that the edges of the panels don't quite align with the guides in CSP, so it's better for me to draw the frame borders digitally so everything lines up. And also, it does help when I'm selecting areas that are going to be toned. The frames that are created digitally act as a boundary when using the magic selection tool basically. And really, that's about it with the inking. My main advice to you is just take your time, enjoy it, get expressive with that pen, try things, commit, and always keep a sketchbook, as I say, to try things out. These skills will transfer over into your inked manga panels. But yeah, just enjoy things, just like anything in life. Take your time, enjoy the experience, and if you make a mistake, well, we're all human. It happens to all of us. I know it happens to me. And that's really all the advice that I've got. I hope you found that helpful. Anyway, I guess that all remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace!